Mike Rosen
Got to see it all.
on News Radio 850 KOA.
Welcome back for our third hour, 713-8585, our telephone number. Lieutenant Colonel Dooley is an instructor. He teaches at the Joint Forces Staff College of the National Defense University. That's Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Dooley. He's also a 1994 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and a highly decorated combat veteran. And now he's in hot water. The course he's teaching at the National Defense University is a course on Islamic radicalism. And apparently some Muslims are offended by some of the things he's teaching in this course on Islamic radicalism. I suspect that some Muslims might be offended just by the name of the course, Islamic radicalism, if some Muslims don't believe that fellow Muslims can be capable of radicalism, especially if they're accused of being radicals by infidels who ought to be converted forcibly or put to death. In any event, what makes this a public policy issue is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, has been critical of Colonel Dooley and has ordered him to remove any material from his course, ordered him to purge material that could be regarded as offensive by Muslims. And this has placed a cloud over Colonel Dooley's career. I contacted Richard Thompson, who's the president and chief counsel of the Thomas More Law Center, who has some strong views on this, and we've got him with us on the air right now. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell people about the Thomas More Law Center and a little bit about your background.
Okay. The Thomas More Law Center is a national public interest law firm. It's based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We defend the Judeo-Christian heritage of America and its moral values, and we also promote and defend a strong national defense and a sovereign United States of America. And it's in that last part of the mission, strong national defense and a sovereign United States of America, that got us involved with the Colonel Dooley case. And so, as you indicated, we have very strong feelings about this case. It goes back to a letter that was sent to the Department of Defense as well as to the White House and other federal agencies that are responsible for protecting our national security. And this letter, signed by 57 Muslim organizations, demanded that all training materials that they judged offensive to Islam be purged, and any of the instructors that used these materials be effectively disciplined. And that's what happened to Colonel Dooley. As you indicated, he is a 1994 graduate of the West Point Military Academy. And beyond that, his record in the military was sterling. He was on a trajectory up. One day he would have probably been one of our top generals. He was the aide-de-camp to 3 generals during his career. He served 6 operational and combat tours. And every one of the what we call officer evaluation reports, OERs, they are termed OERs in the military, listed him as outstanding and must promote before even the rest of the people in his military rank would be promoted. He was that well regarded. Even while he was in the National Defense University teaching that course, the first OER, the first officer evaluation report, indicated, again, outstanding officer, must promote, must give him a command position, and they indicated he was the top-ranked military instructor at that college. And yet, when information came out that was offensive to Muslims, they immediately, number one, closed down the course. General Dempsey closed down the course. General Dempsey also issued an order that all material that was being used by the military educational units be reviewed, and any material offensive to Muslim be scrubbed. And thirdly, General Dempsey ordered what is called a negative officer evaluation report, a negative OER, which means for all intents and purposes, that this brilliant career that Colonel Dooley was on the way to have was cut short. And so America lost an effective officer who was on a trajectory upward. But even more important than that, Mike, what this sends a signal out to all the other instructors and all the other military officials in senior positions that do not dare say anything that Muslims might deem offensive to Islam, because your career will be cut short. And what this means, obviously, is this. If we cannot truly identify the true threat of the enemy, then we cannot defeat the enemy. And that is our concern. It's not just the individual miscarriage of justice for Colonel Dooley, but it is even a greater problem, and that is, a national security threat.
The advice of the famous Chinese philosopher General Sun Tzu about military strategy, first and foremost, is know your enemy. And I think we can say, in all fairness, that there is something called Islamic radicalism. For example, Iran's Mahmoud Ahmadinejad strikes me as objectively a radical Muslim. Osama bin Laden, a radical Muslim. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a radical Muslim. They exist. How can we pretend rationally that they don't?
Right. I mean, it's Pollyannish to believe that Islam and radical Islam is not a danger to the United States of America. After all, we can look at 9/11. We can look at what Anwar al-Awlaki did. We can look at what Nidal Hassan did. And, overlaid on all of this is this political correctness that is occupying or capturing the higher echelons of the Pentagon. When Nidal Hassan walked into this room at Fort Hood, Texas, and gunned down over 40 of his fellow soldiers, yelling "Allah Akbar," everyone in the United States realized that this was a terrorist attack. Yet, what did the military call it? Workplace violence. They're afraid to offend Muslims. If we can't tell the truth about what we are facing as a nation, the internal threat of Islam as well as the external threat, then we are doomed to be defeated.
Let's take a break here and put General Dempsey's remarks in context. And General Dempsey has a history. Yes, he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he serves as chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the pleasure of the Commander-in-Chief, Barack Obama, who, of course, was instrumental in making General Dempsey the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. General Dempsey was recently criticized in an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal by a retired admiral who took issue with General Dempsey's criticism of retired Navy SEALs who were critical of Barack Obama's showboating on the killing of Osama bin Laden. General Dempsey had said that people in the military are obliged not to take political positions. That certainly may be true for people on active duty, people currently in the military, but veterans who are retired are under no such restriction. And in that piece, and I forget the admiral's name. Maybe you know the one I'm talking about.
I know the piece because I read it. I forget the admiral's name as well.
He reminded us that 3 of the 4 American presidents featured on Mount Rushmore were members of the military at one point in their lives, the federal military. Abraham Lincoln, the 4th, was in the Illinois militia, who obviously got involved in politics so much so that they were presidents of the United States. Let's talk about General Dempsey's agenda when we come back on 850 KOA.
NMLS 182334, regulated by the Division of Real Estate.
I've been telling you about my friends at American Financing for some time now. They're sponsoring this hour of my podcast. Military personnel, streamline your VA refinance even if you're over 100% equity. No appraisal needed. Call 303-695-7000 or online at AmericanFinancing.net. Richard Thompson, our guest, President and Chief Counsel of the Thomas More Law Center. We're talking about Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Dooley, who's now under fire, has been poorly evaluated in his official officer evaluation report, all of this at the behest of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Martin Dempsey, because Colonel Dooley had the had the audacity to teach a course at the National Defense University on Islamic radicalism, which any objective observer would have to concede exists, which is not to say that all Muslims are radicals, but it is to say that some are, and we know about them only too well. Regarding General Dempsey and the criticism that he was rightly exposed to for asserting that veterans don't have a right to get involved in politics and take political issues and criticize the President of the United States. We're talking about veterans now, not people currently on active duty. Is he just carrying baggage for the President of the United States, for Barack Obama?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Obviously, as you indicated, General Dempsey is a political appointee of the President, meets with the President at least weekly, and serves right under the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta. This is a modus operandi that I see happening. You know, when the entire Libya terrorist attack occurred, what is the first thing that our administration did? They apologized for freedom of expression, freedom of speech. They went after the filmmakers. They spent money on a TV show, TV ads. They attacked one of the core principles of the United States of America. And just because someone has served in our military does not all at once eliminate that person's right to free speech. And of relevance to Colonel Dooley, Colonel Dooley was assigned as an instructor to the National Defense University. The National Defense University has regulations regarding free speech, and I won't go through all of them, but they basically indicate the common good depends on the free search for the truth and free exposition. Academic freedom is therefore understood to be essential to the U.S. national interest and upheld by the United States Supreme Court. And it goes on to say that there is no subject or issue is considered taboo. There are no approved school solutions. Students are encouraged, indeed expected, to look at issues from new perspectives. Same goes for the faculty. So what General Dempsey was doing, again, at the behest, I'm sure, and we'll find out if and when we file a lawsuit, General Dempsey was acting as a I don't want to be too harsh on him, but he was acting as a puppet. That may be too strong of a word, but because he is a general, he had a career in the military, but he was acting on behalf of the White House when he came out with these rules. He was acting on behalf of the White House when he criticized former SEALs who are now citizens, private citizens, for exercising their free speech. In fact, I would submit that when General Dempsey attacked civilians for their exercise of constitutional rights, it was General Dempsey who was acting politically, not these individuals who had a total right to free speech.
Let's analyze the process here. You talked about this letter that was signed by 57 representatives of various Islamic organizations, right, Muslim organizations, protesting the conduct of this course at the National Defense University, which General Dempsey responded to. However, it seems to me highly likely. And by the way, do you know who this letter was addressed to begin
yes,
with?
The letter was addressed to Brennan, who was in the White House, and copies went to the various federal agencies, like the Department of Defense. It went to Leon Panetta, Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI. Each of them got a copy of the letter, and they were asking all of these organizations in the letter to purge any of their instruction material or training material that was deemed offensive to Islam, and then to discipline. So all of these individuals got that letter.
So John Brennan is the White House counterterrorism advisor, right?
Right.
And he was one of the persons to whom this was directed initially.
And of course, he has a very unusual view of this whole process. Again, he doesn't want the military or any of the national organizations that defend our security to use the word jihad or terrorism. Again, controlling the language so that our people who are supposed to defend us will not adequately describe the enemy. We are dealing with jihadists. The organizations that are out there, many of them will, like CARE, that was one of the signatories to
Council on American Islamic Relations, which is an activist group. Let me go back to the process, though, Richard. So this letter lands at the White House, and presumably this letter is discussed with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Of course, his boss is the Secretary of Defense, a civilian.
Right.
And presumably this is a matter that comes to the attention of the President of the United States. I would suspect the Chief of Staff at the White House is also involved in this.
Right.
Since the Commander-in-Chief, the President, since the buck stops at his desk, I think it's highly likely that Barack Obama instructed General Dempsey to take this position, and General Dempsey dutifully did so.
Right. Now, here's the interesting thing is about this, Mike, is this. The letter comes out in October of 2011. Shortly thereafter, General Dempsey sends a letter or a directive to all of his command saying, I want you to review your courses to see if there's anything offensive to Islam. Okay? That comes out shortly thereafter, within a month or two of the letter that was signed by the 57 Muslim organizations. He gets back a response from the National Defense University before the end of the year in November that says that we've looked at our courses and there is nothing offensive to Islam. And by the way, there is such a thing at the National Defense University as academic freedom. Now, so Dempsey reports back dutifully, we don't have any offensive material. A few months later, information is brought to Dempsey's attention that there is this course on radical Islam where they're discussing such things as what to do in case a nuclear weapon was detonated, what are the various scenarios. And they use the various scenarios that were there for discussion purposes as an indication that Colonel Dooley was advocating nuclear weapons against Medina and the various holy sites, and that he was declaring war on Islam, which was never the case. Colonel Dooley never advocated those things. Those things were discussed in these classes. These were this was a 16-hour course, not of college freshmen, but of high-ranking military officers from the various branches of the military. These were colonels and lieutenant colonels, and they were provided with various scenarios, various hypothetical situations, and they were asked to discuss these hypothetical situations. One, let's say a nuclear weapon is detonated in New York. Thousands of American citizens are killed. What will you do? Okay, you can do nothing. From one part of the spectrum is nothing, to the other part of the spectrum is declare war on Islam and bomb the holy sites.
Right, Richard, hold that thought. It's the bottom of the hour. Time to take a break. When we come back, one of the things I want to go directly at is the whole notion of whether or not we should be constrained at a national defense university or anything else any place else where policy is discussed, whether we should be constrained from saying things that our enemy might take offense to. And while our enemy is not every Muslim in the world, there's certainly an element of Islam that is our declared enemy and declared by them at us. Right back on 850 KOA.
NMLS 182334, regulated by the Division of Real Estate.
I've been telling you about my friends at American Financing for some time now. They're sponsoring this hour of my podcast. Military personnel streamline your VA refinance even if you're over 100% equity. No appraisal needed. Call 303-695-7000 or online at AmericanFinancing.net. Our guest is Richard Thompson, President and Chief Counsel at the Thomas More Law Center, who is intervening in defense of Colonel Matthew Dooley, who has been upbraided and has had his officer evaluation report reflect a negative appraisal because he taught a course in Islamic radicalism at the National Defense University, which some Muslim groups found offensive. Let me step back a little bit, Richard, and see if I can describe the big picture here. It strikes me as absurd. First of all, we've had mortal enemies in the past. During the Second World War, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. They were our sworn enemies. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union. These were countries with uniformed militaries who were at war with us. We no doubt said things about those countries that citizens of those countries and leaders of those countries would find offensive. So what? Ronald Reagan referred to the Soviet Union publicly as the evil empire. Now, in this era of asymmetrical warfare, a religion, or at least a branch of a religion, not a country, is at war with us. We've been attacked on numerous occasions all over the world and even in our homeland, not by officially a sovereign country or its army. We've been attacked just recently in Libya by a radical element of a religion. And when you're at war with a radical element of a religion, not a country or a uniformed army, and that radical element of the religion is at war with you, they're the attacker, obviously you have to use different strategies and different tactics. So with that as foundation, an instructor at a National Defense University should be censured for offending our enemy because some Muslim groups don't think he should do that, and the President of the United States agrees with them. This is preposterous on its face. Comment.
Okay, well, I think you're absolutely right. Now, we have to keep in mind this. Muslims have two conversations going. One is the conversation they let the Western world on, and the second is a conversation with each other, where they tell each other what they're going to do to the United States of America. Tied to all of this that is going on is the Muslim Brotherhood, and there was the Holy Land Foundation trial back in 2008, which was the largest terrorist funding trial in which the government was successful in prosecuting and convicting. They introduced in that trial a memorandum for other Muslim partners, and they said in that memorandum, and I'm quoting you, "The Muslim Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within." And that's what's happening. They have sort of influenced the Pentagon at the upper echelon to let their guard down, not to be able to identify, as you indicated, the true threat of the enemy. And so what happens is the very people who are supposed to be protecting us are defanged, so to speak, so that they do not really recognize the
Let me give
threat.
you a somewhat different variation of that, and I worked at the Pentagon at the upper levels.
Okay.
I doubt that very many people at the Pentagon, very many people in the military culture, agree with this entire notion and that this colonel should have been censored and that this class ought to have been eliminated. What you have here is the imposition of a vision by Barack Obama, who's also the commander-in-chief, and down the chain of command, the vast majority of people are simply following orders.
I would agree with you, but here's what I would say in response. Number one, Lieutenant Colonel Dooley spent 18 years of his life in following the orders of his commanders. He put his life on the line, not only for the people of the United States, but also following the orders. When Lieutenant Colonel Dooley is then attacked by a political agent of the White House who wears a uniform and has 4 stars, it would seem to me that some of the commanders in that chain of command should have the moral courage to stand up and say, wait a minute, he did nothing wrong, and he should not have his officer evaluation report express a negative viewpoint. Now, it wasn't General Dempsey who finally wrote the negative OER. It was a general that was Colonel Dooley's immediate supervisor that wrote the negative OER. And my position is he should have refused because he knew that all he was doing was following the politically tainted orders of the general. And there has to be moral courage up and down the line to say, wait a minute, that's an unlawful order, and I'm not going to follow it. I agree with you that the vast majority of officers and enlisted men would support what Colonel Dooley did. In fact, since this controversy broke out, he has people coming up to him and saying, great job, something had to be said, and you said it. But these people will say it privately. They will not say it publicly, and they will not defend him. That's why the Thomas More Law Center is involved.
I agree with your moral stance on this, but what you're calling for is someone to defy the commander-in-chief for various of his representatives down the chain of command, and people have done that in the past, but they do so at great risk to their political career, their military careers. You might remember...
like Stanley McChrystal, right?
Like Stanley McChrystal, or if I can take you back a little bit, if you remember General Singlaub,
yes,
who was a commander in Korea, who took issue with the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, about withdrawing forces from Korea. And that was the end of, ultimately, of General Singlaub's career.
Right. I believe in civilian control of the military, but I do also believe that there is a form of leadership that the military prides itself in. When people put their lives on the line for you as a commander, you owe that loyalty back to that individual. And I haven't seen that publicly, at least in the case of Colonel Dooley. Going back to another point,
it ought to start with General Dempsey.
It should, absolutely. General Dempsey should have said no.
Hold that thought. Right back on 850 KOA. We'll take some of your phone calls.
NMLS 182334, regulated by the Division of Real Estate.
I've been telling you about my friends at American Financing for some time now. They're sponsoring this hour of my podcast. Military personnel, streamline your VA refinance even if you're over 100% equity. No appraisal needed. Call 303-695-7000 or online at AmericanFinancing.net. 11:50 the time. Richard Thompson, our guest, President and Chief Counsel of Thomas More Law Center, talking about the travails of an Army lieutenant colonel and instructor at the National Defense University who's been censored and had his career severely damaged because he taught a class on Islamic radicalism that apparently the Obama administration thought offensive to Muslims who complained about it and decided to kill the course. Let's take a phone call or two. Al and Aurora, you're on 850 KOA. Hello, Al.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Hey, listen, I just want to say that somebody needs to look at General Dempsey. I mean, the Congress needs to investigate him or something, because didn't he call that reverend that was involved in the video that supposedly disrupted the entire or upset the entire Muslim world because, quote unquote, that video? I mean, he's got a real problem, and he may be an Obama appointee, but he's got a problem. And I'd like to know where he was when Major Hassan was in.
Well, keep in mind that he serves at the pleasure of the president, and he's doing the president's bidding, so he's not going to be relieved by the president of the United States.
Well, then somebody needs to call him in and investigate him in a congressional committee and find out what's really going on.
Is this the kind of thing, Richard, that can be dealt with in an investigation?
Well, that's a very good point. It can't be dealt with what we're doing, but the Congress has oversight of the military.
Mm-hmm.
It struck me. I was a lieutenant in the Army many years ago, and it struck me. Here is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff with all the world problems on his plate, and he has enough time to make a direct call to Pastor Terry Jones, who wasn't really involved with making the movie, but knew who did, and talks to him about making sure that movie doesn't get out. Now, here is a general in the Army talking about preventing the expression of free speech by an American citizen. Doesn't he have something more important to do than do that? I think that's the point that I would make. he is totally off the reservation if he believes that one of his primary responsibilities as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is to call American citizens and tell them or discourage them from exercising their free speech rights under our Constitution.
Yeah, good point. Al, thanks for your phone call. Let's go to Superior. Brent, you're on 850 KOA. Hello, Brent.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
Good.
I just had a quick question for your guest in the statement. There's a historical example very close to what we're seeing today, which was before World War II, General Doolittle, one of our greatest national heroes and probably the greatest aviation mind in our country, was going around trying to tell everyone who would listen that Japan was building up its armed forces to attack the United States. And the administration didn't want to hear that. And so they tried to silence him by either trying him or they may even try to court-martial him to silence him. And, of course, unfortunately, we had to find out that he was right when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And I'd like to ask your guest if he thinks there's any possible parallel to that today.
Absolutely. There is a tremendous parallel to that. In fact, a comment in one of the newspaper articles actually mentioned the Doolittle issue, and I don't recall whether he was actually court-martialed, but certainly his career was really jeopardized. That's why the National Defense University has in its regulations that free speech is important to the security of the United States. It's in the national interest that we can have people that disagree with the national policy of the military and can come forward and say we're wrong. There's a recent article in another magazine that said, why are illiterate Afghans kicking our butts in Afghanistan when we have the most sophisticated army? And the result was that our higher echelon military are afraid to oppose the doctrine that has been developed by the Pentagon when they see what happens on the ground does not meet with what they think is happening. General Dempsey was in Afghanistan several weeks ago when there was these green on blue attacks, and his statement was everything is fine. We're on track. Well, now we know that it's not fine. We're not on track, and we're leaving earlier than probably we would have.
Once again, when he says everything's on track, he's speaking for his boss, the president.
Well, yeah, I guess you could put it that way, and then his boss shakes the head, yes, but I think the American people were taking it differently, and that they're not being honest with the American people, and that you can't do that and have that kind of credibility last a long time.
I should also note that sometimes senior military officers do publicly take issue with their boss. General Douglas MacArthur comes to mind in his dealings with President Truman during the Korean War.
Right, and his boss took the action that he certainly had a right to. Again, I believe in civilian control of the military, but I also believe that the military has a moral responsibility to the American people and to our national security. When the president is wrong, they should put their career on the line and say, I oppose what the president is doing. Let the president fire them. We have generals. The double standard here is horrible. General Dempsey supported another four-star general who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money without authority and against the regulations.
I'm afraid you hear that music. It wraps it up. And
okay,
I suspect when Barack Obama and his staff vetted General Dempsey, they gave him that job figuring that he would support the president in his policies and vision, and we're seeing a good example of it. Richard, thanks for being with us. That wraps it for today. News coming up.